I used to think that professionalism could soften any edge. In Boston, clients called me the quiet one who solved chaos with calendars and contracts, who could make a bridal party of cousins who had not spoken in years pose together like a Christmas card. That week, the week that ended in Greenwich, Connecticut, was supposed to be another proof of that reputation. The Ford family held a name that opened doors by simply being whispered, and my husband Joey wore that name like a blazer that never wrinkled. I ran my own planning company out of a small office near the seaport, where gulls floated over the harbor, and my whiteboard was a grid of timelines, deliverables, and contingency notes. Every vendor relationship lived in a digital file, every clause marked, every invoice routed through my company account. People say weddings are about love. In my world, they are about paper. And paper had always protected me. When Sarah Joey's younger sister got engaged, the family called me immediately, not only as the bride's sister-in-law, but as the person who could orchestrate a weekend like an overture. I set up DocuSign links for each contract so no one could claim they had not read a clause. I fronted deposits from my business account to secure the venue, the band, the tenting, the lighting, the caterer, the shuttles, and the guest welcome gifts. It was not charity. It was leverage. My company name sat on the signature line mine on the guarantor line, and a neat paragraph in every agreement stated what happened if fraud, reputational risk, or material misrepresentation appeared. That language slept quietly behind the scenes like a breaker switch you never planned to touch. Still, I saved every receipt and screenshot because I had learned in this family sentiment fades, but documentation does not. My mother-in-law Mary did not like sentiment anyway. She liked history lineage, a last name engraved on crystal. At the family townhouse in Greenwich, long before the ceremony, I would hear Mary's voice slide across rooms like cold air praising tradition and sighing at the modern mess of blended families and hyphenated names. She had a way of smiling that left no warmth. If you asked Mary a question, she often answered a different one, the one that kept her on higher ground. She was beautiful in the way marble staircases are beautiful, polished cold and built to make people feel small when they look up. Joey floated between us, equal parts charming and absent. Business trips sprouted without context. Texts arrived late. He said he was working on a family fund that needed discretion and agility, words that mean everything and nothing. I cataloged feelings the way I cataloged expenses, date time, subject outcome. When he kissed my cheek and said, "You are a lifesaver," I wrote down what I had saved. When he forgot a meeting with the florist and promised to make it up, I wrote down what I had moved. My love had turned into a ledger. I told myself that marriage is a long accounting of grace. Planning the wedding gave me a theater to keep busy inside. The venue was a waterfront club where sailboats dotted the horizon like stitching. The rehearsal dinner was set beneath lanterns, the ceremony under an arch of late spring roses, and the reception in a clear-top tent where the night sky would feel borrowed just for Sarah. She was sweet in the way people are sweet when they want to be loved for it. She sent me photos of dresses and asked for my opinion, then went quiet for days, as if the asking had been the performance and not the real request. I kept reminding myself that she was the bride, not the project, and that compassion is cheaper than criticism. Patty, the venue's lead coordinator, and I became a silent team. We ran timelines together, double-checked deliveries, and spoke the language of hospitality that outsiders rarely hear: back-of-house routes, service windows, plate counts, rain plans, band break, sets, fire code capacities. Patty had an eye like a lighthouse beam, slow, steady, seeing far. On our last logistics call before I drove down from Boston, she said, "Your calm in the middle of a storm saves lives." I laughed because it sounded dramatic for a wedding, but I understood what she meant. People forget that gatherings are systems. If one link fails, the chain whips. Through it all, Mary performed a different kind of oversight. She summoned vendors to her townhouse as if the house itself were a boardroom. She evaluated ribbon widths as if they were investment tranches. I learned to translate her tone for the team. When Mary said curious, she meant displeased. When she said interesting, she meant no. One afternoon, I arrived with sample menus, and Mary tapped the cover as if it were a report that had failed to meet forecast. "Family is blood," she said, "and tradition is the only language guests understand." It was not a critique of the menu. It was a mission statement. I placed the menus back in my tote and smiled the smile that says you have heard and filed the information in the correct drawer. What I did not file away was the piece of me that kept noticing small shifts. Joey hovered in doorways and left half sentences in the air. Sarah stopped tagging me and planning group chats. Patty once paused in the hall as a private conversation ended on the far side of a cracked door, a conversation about seats and names and who belonged where. I told myself that weddings make people feral and that it would settle once vows were spoken and the band hit the second set. I told myself that Mary's obsession with lineage would soften when she remembered I had been the one to salvage the rain plan last summer for her charity gala, the one that saved face in front of donors who equate weather with competence. On the drive from Boston to Greenwich the day before the wedding, I rehearsed the weekend in my head like a script. Check-in windows, welcome baskets, shuttle loops, vendor meal counts, power supply for the band, tent lighting cues for the first dance. I repeated those items because repetition makes a rhythm, and rhythm calms the human body. At a rest stop, I opened my laptop and skimmed every contract one more time. There was comfort in the clean typography of terms and signatures, in the neat alignment of dates in the clause that gave me the right to pause services if certain risks arose. If love is a vow spoken aloud, integrity is a paragraph written quietly and honored. I reached Greenwich at sunset and parked beneath a row of manicured trees. Inside the townhouse, polished floors reflected the kind of money that pretends it is just wood. Mary's smile appeared at the top of the stairs and did not reach her eyes. Joey kissed my cheek and said he was swamped with a call. Sarah floated down the hall in a silk robe, waving with fingertips like a child practicing grace. I set my binder on a console table and felt a small and sudden ache in my chest, the kind that says you have entered a place where something you love might be taken from you. But I was the calm one. I labeled gift bags, placed escort cards, confirmed delivery windows, and texted Patty our last-minute notes. Somewhere beyond those walls, the ocean whispered a steady hush, and I let myself believe that the sound was blessing, not warning. The truth, which I would learn soon enough, is that some storms are quiet until they arrive in full. And when they do, they test the strength of every piece of paper you have ever signed. The rehearsal dinner glowed like a postcard of old Connecticut money, the kind where nostalgia is curated and the tide is scheduled to behave. The waterfront club sat in a hush of manicured hedges and polished brass, a place that called its parking attendants valets and its bar a lounge. Lanterns were strung along the terrace, and inside the dining room, the light from a dozen sconces washed everything in honey. I cataloged the comforts, because comforts are the first things people weaponize when they want to make you small. On the sideboard, there were 5 kinds of mustard, presented like a tasting flight 3 artisan breads, braided into careful ropes, and napkins embroidered with the Ford crest in thread the color of champagne. Little place cards waited in straight lines, and the maitre d' murmured to his staff in a cadence that meant we were on time. If weddings are theater rehearsals, are the quiet blocking where you learn who intends to upstage whom. Mary arrived in a column dress the shade of winter pearls, wearing a smile that looked civil from across a room and surgical up close. She floated between tables, laying a hand on a shoulder, here adjusting a glass by half an inch there, the way a conductor taps a stand before the first note. Tradition is our theme, she announced to no one and everyone, as if a theme were a fact of nature and not a choice. When the maitre d' held up the seating chart to confirm the final arrangement for the dinner, Mary leaned in, pointed, and said, "Family table is 4. She said it lightly as though she were counting forks. My name did not appear near that table. I reminded myself that this was the rehearsal, not the reception, and that sometimes brides prefer to sit with their wedding party the night before. It was a plausible story, and I reached for it because plausibility is a soft pillow. Patty eased alongside me in the corridor outside the dining room, a slim binder tucked to her ribs. She had the kind of calm that makes you think of lighthouses and nurses. "Quick note," she said, low enough that the words felt private. When I dropped off the welcome bags at the townhouse earlier, the front door camera chimed. Mary was on the phone. I heard 405 before she noticed me. She let the information breathe between us. The phrase clicked against the memory of the seating chart, like two puzzle pieces that should not fit, and yet did. I felt the first sting of a paper cut you do not notice until air touches it. "Thank you," I told her. "We will chalk it up to rehearsal math." She studied my face to see if I was embarrassed. I was not. Embarrassment takes heat. I was all cool air and folders. Inside, Joey lifted a glass and kissed my temple as if nothing at all had shifted. Sarah's laughter chased itself around the table like a ribbon unwinding bright and a little too high. When I met her eyes, she blinked as if seeing someone in a window she had not expected to be open. "Tomorrow will be perfect," she said, rehearsing her vows to perfection more than to love. I smiled and asked about cue music and processional spacing things I could control. Control is a habit, and habit can be mercy. Across the room, Mary watched us as if she were timing a speech. The rehearsal itself passed like a polite storm. We choreographed who would walk when. The officiant practiced the cadence of the exchange. The band tested a bar of the first dance and then cut the sound as if keeping a secret. I made notes about the angle of the ceremony arch and a scuff on the dance floor that needed repair. I told Patty we would switch the champagne pour to begin at the second verse. These are the adjustments that make a night look effortless. What I did not adjust was the new awareness folding itself into my spine. Some choices had already been made in rooms without me. At dinner, the family table gleamed beneath a low arrangement of roses and laurel. The chairs stood in a solemn four like a courtroom bench. I took my seat 2 tables away among vendors and cousins and friends of friends who did not know where to file me in their minds. My place card looked perfectly at home beside a linen bread plate, which is the strange thing about exclusion. It borrows the manners of hospitality to make itself look kind. "You must be thrilled," a guest said to me, mistaking me for the planner only, and not the sister-in-law who had been uninvited from a word as small as family. "I am focused," I answered, and I was. Focus is a life raft when the shore slides away. Mary gave a toast that roped the past to the present with phrases about legacy and roots. She spoke about blood as if it were a virtue rather than a circulation system. When she said the word family, her gaze skimmed over the room and did not land on me. That is a skill too, the art of not seeing. Joey clinked her glass and smiled the way a son smiles when he has been told how to be a son. I recorded the sentence in my mind, "Family table is 4. It would matter later, and I have learned to label what will matter later. I will tell that part in detail when it arrives because it is important. Between courses, I slipped into the service hall to breathe the cooler air that lives behind banquets. Patty was there checking plate counts with the kitchen captain. All smooth, she asked, "Which is our shorthand for, 'Can you handle another thing?'" I nodded. "Smooth," I said. "Tomorrow we will open the house at 3, cue the band at 6, and start seating by 6:30. I avoided numbers and used words because words do not blink on a screen, because words do not get erased with a key. She handed me a copy of the final reception seating chart for my binder. My eye went first to habit verify spelling, verify table numbers, verify the order of speeches. Then I traced the line for the family table and felt the smallest tilt in the floor. 4 chairs, 4 places, 4 names that were not mine. I returned to the dining room with my face arranged in the neutral expression planners wear when they are thinking about power outlets. The dessert course arrived as a relic of an older world with tiny spoons and saucers and a tower of macarons in 3 pastel shades. Joey squeezed my knee beneath the table and murmured, "Almost there." I nodded and thought, almost where? Almost to the moment when performance becomes proof. Almost to the moment when I would have to decide if I preferred spotlight or leverage. If tonight was the rehearsal of comfort, tomorrow would be the premiere of what comfort is meant to conceal. Driving back to the townhouse, the road curled along the water, and the club lights dwindled behind us like a constellation someone had forgotten to name. Patty's warning replayed in my head in quiet script 4, not 5. In another life, I might have confronted it in the driveway. In this one, I cataloged it like a line item and set an alarm in my mind. A rehearsal is not the event. It is the hint, and hints, if you collect them carefully enough, become a map. I did not know it yet, but the map would lead to a room where every contract I had signed would matter more than any apology they were prepared to give. Sleep did not come easily that night. The townhouse exhaled the kind of quiet that looks like peace and feels like pressure. In the guest room, I laid my binder on the desk and opened the laptop as if the screen could be a window that told the truth. Habit took the wheel, cross-checked deliveries, reconfirmed the shuttle loops, skimmed the DocuSign dashboards for any signer who had dawdled, all green. Then I opened the payment ledger I keep for every large event, a simple spreadsheet that has saved me more times than luck ever could. Line by line, I matched deposits to invoices and invoices to dates. That is when the pattern began to flicker at the edge of the page, not a missing number, but a rhythm that did not feel like mine. Looking back now, the first seam that split was a housekeeping detail no one else would have noticed. One wire transfer from the family fund had arrived one day early, and a few dollars heavy as if someone had fat-fingered a keypad. The next two arrived right on time, but rounded in a way that meant nothing operationally, and everything emotionally. It was the sort of rounding people do when they are forwarding money from somewhere else in a hurry. I wrote a note in the margin to ask Joey about it, then erased the note because there is a difference between questions and proof, and a planner who confuses the two ends up with neither. A soft knock tapped my door, then Patty's voice low as if not to wake the house. "All good?" she asked through the wood. I opened the door and let her in. She smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and ocean air, the perfume of someone who has spent her life making other people's days look effortless. I showed her the ledger, not because I needed help balancing columns, but because sometimes you pass a weight to make sure it exists. "Small anomalies," I said. "Could be nothing. Could be something." She read the screen the way a nurse reads a monitor. "If it is nothing, it will stay that way. If it is something, it will repeat," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And 4, not 5, is not a miscount. It is an order." The sentence settled between us like a card face down. I told her I would handle the seating in the morning, that for tonight, we would let the ocean do the talking. After she left, I texted Callie in Boston, my friend who knows how to hold a rope when someone else's hands are slick. She called back on the first ring. "Quick pulse check," I said. "If someone wanted to erase a person without making a scene, where would they start?" Callie did not hesitate. Paper. They would start with paper and end with chairs. She meant it as a joke, but the truth inside it nicked me. I told her about the seating chart, the camera phrase, the rounding in the ledger. "Do not bleed for them," she said. "Make copies. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow you will need your spine." I promised I would try. I did not promise I would sleep. In that hour between midnight and morning, when even wealthy houses creak like wooden ships, I let older memories surface to test this new one for proportion. Thanksgiving 2 years back, when Mary assigned me to the children's table to help with crafts while the adults discussed portfolios. The charity gala where my name was omitted from the acknowledgments after I rebuilt the rain plan that saved the whole fantasy from drowning. A summer barbecue where Joey introduced me to a donor as the organizer, not his wife, and kissed me on the temple as if that counted for context. At the time, each cut felt survivable and small. Looking back now, those were rehearsals, 2 miniature versions of the decision they would stage in front of 120 guests. Around dawn, I opened the folder labeled Contingencies and reread the clause I had written into every event agreement since the year I learned that love without boundaries is an invitation to be erased. The clause was spare and unemotional. If fraud, material misrepresentation, or reputational risk arises, the planner may pause services and payments pending verification. I had never used it in anger. I had used it only once for a faulty generator. Still, the word steadied me. This is important revenge is not a scream. It is a file that matches its title. I showered and dressed while the townhouse woke. In the hall, I passed Mary speaking into her phone, the smile in her voice like light off a blade. "We are keeping it intimate," she said to someone. "Family only." She did not lower her tone when she saw me. She raised it by a degree as if to make sure I heard the word family and understood it as a sign on a locked door. I smiled back and asked what time she would like the car. She chose a time that would make Sarah late. I scheduled it for the correct time anyway because my job is not to honor someone's pettiness at the expense of a bride's nerves. At the kitchen island, Joey slid a cup of coffee toward me and kissed my cheek. "Big day," he said. He looked handsome and unfinished in his shirt sleeves, the way boys look in movies just before they decide whether to be heroes or disappear. "Where were you last night?" I asked lightly, as if the question were about pillows. "Conference call," he said. Arizona team needed me. Arizona again, that catch-all state where his excuses lived. I noted it and let it pass a fish I would net later when I had a boat and not just a hook. Before we left for the venue, I photographed the seating chart Mary had left on the foyer table. The phone flash made the gold ink glow in a way that almost looked kind. 4 names at the family table arranged like points on a compass that refused to find north. I tucked the photo into a folder I called Record of Changes and emailed it to my office account where a rule sorted all attachments into a date-stamped archive. This will matter later, I told myself. I will tell that part when it is time. For now, I needed the calm body of a person who knows exactly where the circuit breaker lives. On the drive to the club, I rehearsed a choice. One hand on the wheel labeled Confront Now, the other labeled Confirm First. I am a planner. I chose Confirm. At the venue office, I asked the maitre d' to print me the most current reception seating, the one pulled directly from the latest email instructions. He did not know the politics. He knew the printer code. The pages slid into my hands, warm and innocent. I ran my finger down the family table list slowly, like a person finding her own name in a memorial. It was not there. 4, not 5. In the margins, someone had scribbled, "As discussed." That is when the rhythm of my heartbeat changed. Not faster, clearer. A metronome that had decided it was time to mark the truth out loud. Morning at the club arrived with a clean blue sky that pretended it could bless the day into being better than the people inside it. I set my binder on the small oak desk in the venue office, thanked the maitre d' for the fresh printouts, and asked Patty for a moment alone. She closed the door like a curtain. I spread the papers across the desk and let the pattern reveal itself in daylight. 4 names at the family table. 4, not 5. In another column, a penciled note that read, "As discussed." I photographed the page, then opened my laptop and began the kind of inventory that looks like busy work and is actually survival. This is important when people plan to erase you with manners they always leave a breadcrumb in logistics. I opened my payment ledger and compared it against a second file I keep labeled Timeline of Representations, a fancy way of saying what they said and when they said it. The wire transfers from the Ford family fund lined up with vendor deposits, but now, as I stared longer, the rounding told a story. 2 transfers were rounded up in the exact way you do when you are pulling from a different account that does not allow sense, the kind of account people open in a hurry because they need to hide a purchase behind a wall. I checked the memo lines. They were pure, bland words like event security and transportation. I am not a detective. I am a planner. But planning is just dignified detection, and every small, clean lie is a red thread you can follow if your palms do not sweat. Patty returned with a bottle of water and the calm patience of someone who has witnessed many loud mistakes. "Anything you want me to know now or later?" she asked. "Later is fine," I said. "Right now I am confirming." She nodded and set the bottle down without the thud of judgment. "Call if you need a room," she added, which is hospitality code for "I will clear space when you are ready to make the next thing happen." She slipped out, leaving me with the decision I had rehearsed on the drive: confront or confirm. Confirm first. Quiet revenge begins with exact nouns. I opened my email archive and searched for messages where Joey had forwarded vendor approvals. He had surprised me a few weeks earlier by asking to be copied on more items, a sudden interest that had felt like making up for missed florist meetings. The search results bloomed into threads where Joey replied late at night from a time zone that did not match ours. Arizona. Arizona again. I clicked a thread and felt my breath slow into the kind of measured tempo you need in a crisis. Attached to one late reply was a calendar screenshot he had included by mistake, a cropped image from his phone that showed an appointment titled Gina, 16 weeks Thursday. The date stamp on the appointment sat in mid-May. Today was the 1st of June. I did the math without numbers, as women learn to do, even when the world pretends it is not arithmetic. 4 months along. a baby at the center of a family that stood in front of me and told me that blood was the only language tradition understood. If this sounds like I had known all along, I had not. I had known only the shifting mood in the rooms, the way Sarah's eyes slid past mine, the way Mary's voice cooled whenever she said family and left it like a fence post between us. But here was the first proof that would not evaporate when faced with charm. I opened a second folder where I store everything that might someday need a lawyer's eyes and added the screenshot with a note that read, "Attached inadvertently by sender preserve original metadata." That sentence is not dramatic. That sentence keeps people honest. Memory once invited brings friends. I remembered a morning in late February when Joey left early for a flight and the shared tablet on our kitchen island pinged with an iMessage preview, the kind that splashes a bubble of words without waiting for your permission. The bubble was from a contact saved as G and a small brown heart, and it read, "Can you make the appointment next Thursday? I do not want to go alone." The preview faded before the tablet asked for a passcode, and I had told myself then that kindness is a general virtue, that perhaps a friend was ill, that perhaps the brown heart was simply a habit of someone who loved stickers. Today, with the calendar screenshot winking at me from the screen, the memory clicked into place. Looking back now, the story had been spelled all along. I had refused to learn the alphabet. I needed one more anchor before I pulled the lever I had written for moments like this. I opened the home app Joey and I shared and checked the Ring camera history from the Greenwich townhouse where yesterday Patty had heard the line that had sat in my chest like a splinter. There it was, a short clip time-stamped early afternoon. I tapped it, pressed the volume up, and listened to Mary's profile speak into her phone in that bright tone she uses when landing a point. "Family table is 4, she said, and then, after a pause that told the rest of the plan, 4, not 5. The audio was clear. The phrase felt almost benevolent in its cruelty, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis with a practiced sigh. I exported the clip, saved it to the same evidence folder, and because redundancy is the older sister of safety, forwarded a copy to my office email and to a secure cloud drive whose address nobody in the Ford house knew. Now for the numbers that are not digits. There were 120 guests expected tonight. I had fronted deposits in the amount that sounded like half of a down payment on a starter home, and every vendor relationship rested on the fact that my company, not the Ford family, held the contracts. That quiet decision months ago had felt like good business. Today it felt like a life raft I had sewn without knowing I would need it. I printed the latest ledger signed and dated the bottom of the page and slid it into a plastic sleeve. Then I wrote a sentence on a fresh sheet of paper, the kind of sentence you can read aloud without shaking. If fraud, material, misrepresentation, or reputational risk arises, services and payments may be paused pending verification. It was my own clause returned to me like a boomerang, bringing back a chance. You might wonder why I did not march into the bridal suite and throw the paper like confetti. Because spectacle feeds people like Mary. Because loud women are easy to call unstable, and unstable women are easy to erase. Instead, I asked Patty to reserve the small conference room next to the venue office for 10 minutes after the ceremony rehearsal ended. "Understood," she said, and her eyes told me she did. I sent one text to Callie that read in words and not numerals. 4 months, Arizona ring clip confirms. She called back immediately. "Do you want me to drive down?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. First, I freeze the story to the page. Then I decide who gets to read it. I closed the laptop, gathered the papers, and stood up with a steadiness that felt like stepping onto a bridge you built yourself. What they did not know was that the paper they had always underestimated was already awake, already sharp, already on my side. The day of the wedding stepped onto the grounds with a confidence that felt rehearsed, as if weather itself had read the run of show. The sky was a flat, generous blue, the kind that photographs like a promise, and the breeze off the water smelled faintly of salt and cut grass. I arrived early at the club with my binder tucked under one arm, and my face set to the calm that strangers mistake for ease. Vendors moved in clean lines. Glassware chimed softly from crates. The florist lifted the last arc of roses into place and whispered that the light was perfect. I made my rounds the way pilots move through checklists, touching each point, letting muscle memory steady me more than hope ever could. When I finished, I stood at the edge of the terrace and listened to gravel settle under heels, to silverware roll in velvet, to a day ready to do exactly as it was told. That, at least, was honest. Guests began to arrive in waves that looked like wealth has a dress code. The ushers guided them toward the ceremony lawn, and the string quartet eased into a prelude that made the air feel curated. Sarah floated out for photographs, soft and luminous, and for a moment I felt something kind toward the girl who wanted a perfect day, without understanding that perfection cannot be borrowed. Joey appeared beside her, tall and polished and careful. He met my eyes just long enough to suggest a line he would later deny he had rehearsed. "We are almost there." I nodded and filed the phrase with the others. The ring clip in my archive, the calendar screenshot, the seating chart photo, the penciled note that said, "as discussed." My evidence had no heartbeat. That was the point. Paper does not wobble when someone looks at it too hard. The ceremony moved like a well-made clock. Vows were spoken under a sky that held its breath. Applause unspooled and then gathered into cocktail hour, where napkins and laughter did their best to disguise hunger. Mary glided among guests with the composure of a woman who believes she is history's voice. She touched elbows, bestowed compliments, reminded donors from old galas of their own generosity. When she crossed paths with me, her smile sharpened by a degree. "Everything looks just as we envisioned," she said, and I heard the way you hear a door latch. As planned, I answered, because accuracy is a blade too. Her gaze slid past me toward the French doors that led to the reception tent, where the family table sat beneath a low canopy of laurel and white roses like an altar to lineage. When it was time to move guests to dinner, the ushers did their delicate dance, and the maitre d' lifted the reception seating chart onto a small podium like a script that would direct the next act. Escort cards glittered in straight rows. Names found tables with a decorous murmur. I waited at the edge of the tent until the first wave settled, then walked to the family table as one does when one belongs, which is to say, without apology. There were 4 chairs aligned like a verdict, 4 place cards each in gold ink, each a small proclamation. My name was not there. A server, kind and bright and too young to know he was participating in theater, stepped into my path and said in a voice meant to soothe, "We were told to seat you with the staff dinner just until things get settled." He pointed toward a small round near the service entrance where vendors eat quickly and gratefully between cues. His hand shook the way hands shake when they have been told to do something impolite and to do it nicely. I took a breath that did not rise above my collarbone. The string quartet shifted into the first measures of a classic that always makes people sigh. Patty appeared at my shoulder as if conjured by the thought that I would need a witness who speaks fluent logistics. Her eyes asked the question she would not say out loud in front of a staff kid and 120 guests. I gave her the smallest nod to mean, "I see it, I record it, I will not feed it." Mary arrived a moment later, as if summoned by the scent of humiliation. She glanced at the 4 chairs with a contentment so thin it showed its bones. Then she looked at me and let a line drop from her mouth, the way people drop ice into a drink and wait for the crack. "Maybe we miscounted," she said, casual, amused. She did not mean arithmetic. She meant erasure dressed as etiquette. My hands did not lift. My voice did not rise. This is the part in other stories where someone flips a table or sobs or storms out into a parking lot under a sky that refuses to match the mood. But loudness would have handed them the story they had pre-written, the memo in which the wife became unstable at a celebration and had to be managed for the good of the family. I chose stillness instead. I placed my fingertips gently on the back of one of the empty chairs, letting my nail find the seam in the wood, learning its truth with a tactile signature. Then I smiled the small, unfriendly smile that only witnesses understand. "I will check on the band," I said to Patty, which is our code for, "I will decide the next move." Around us, the apparatus of celebration whirred on. The first course glided from the kitchen. Glasses were lifted. A laugh rose from the far end of the tent, bright and oblivious. Joey's gaze slid past me and then snapped back as if remembering optics. He made to stand to perform a gesture that could be photographed as kindness. I shook my head once. Not now. Not on their stage. I turned, walked the service path that skirts the perimeter, and felt the crunch of gravel under my heels the way a heartbeat feels under a wrist. The sky above the clear-top tent stayed extravagantly blue, which is the cruelest thing about weather. Beauty is not a verdict. In the shadow of the catering corridor, I paused and let the humiliation move through me like a tide you refuse to fight. It stung, and then it steadied. I recorded the moment in my mental ledger with a date and a time and a witness. Patty stepped into the alcove and asked quietly, "Room?" She meant the small conference room by the office. In a little while, I said, 10 minutes after the first dance. She nodded, understanding that I would not interrupt a bride's first spin even for a reckoning. We stood together for a breath, two professionals watching the machine do what it does, and then I sent a short text to my own number that read, written in words, "Family table 4, not 5, server directed to staff round. Documentation does not care about pride. It cares about the record." But what they did not know was that this moment, this neat little performance of exclusion, had already pulled the lever they feared. I did not need to raise my voice. I had paper, and paper had me. I straightened my shoulders, stepped back into the light, and smiled at a guest who asked if everything was under control. As planned, I said again, because that was true. Their plan had arrived on cue. Mine was in the wings, dressed for its entrance. I did not storm. I scheduled. While the tent softened into toasts and the band tuned a last string, I slipped down the service corridor and into the small conference room Patty had kept ready, the kind of neutral space where decisions put on clean shoes. I closed the door, set my binder on the table, and opened my laptop to the dashboard that has always felt more like home than any living room. Quiet revenge is not a shout, it is a sequence. Step 1, document the harm. Step 2, invoke the clause. Step 3, let the system, not your temper, do the heavy lifting. The first email I drafted was to the vendor group addressed by name, not number, because people move faster when they feel seen. Subject line, temporary pause under contractual risk provision. In the body, I kept to the language we all agreed to months ago due to material misrepresentation and emergent reputational risk disclosed today. Services and payments are paused pending verification. No further deliverables are to be executed or released absent written clearance from my office. I did not accuse. I did not narrate. I cited paragraph and line, then attached the signed agreements. A second paragraph clarified the human part staff safety. Comes first, vendors will be compensated for work to date under the notice terms, and the venue's operations manager has been looped in so no one gets cornered into a confrontation masquerading as hospitality. I read it aloud once to hear if any heat had snuck in. It had not. I hit send. Next, the bank. My company accounts were the spigot. The Ford family fund was the reservoir. I could not lock their reservoir, but I could shut off the spigot they assumed would cooperate. I opened the secure portal and placed a hold on all outgoing wires tied to the Ford event file, flagging them as disputed pending an internal review. The note field was spare potential fraud, reputational risk, and conflict of interest identified at client site. Halt disbursements until cleared. I requested a callback from the relationship manager I have used since my first year in business, a woman who appreciates that calm is not the same as consent. This is important. Power is not always possession. Sometimes it is refusal. Then the venue. I drafted a short memo to the general manager and copied Patty and the maitre d'. I explained that by the terms of the agreements, my company's authorization was required for all production releases, and that authorization was now suspended. I asked that the bar continue standard service for the next course to avoid jolting guests, and that music proceed through the first dance so the bride would have the photograph she deserved. 10 minutes after that, we would hold. The memo was kind and precise, which is the most dangerous combination. I added one line at the end that made the manager exhale when he read it later, if the family produced a new guarantor with equivalent coverage. Tonight, the venue was free to accept it, and I would step back from operations with gratitude for their professionalism. In other words, I left dignity on the table, but I took away the checkbook. Only after the levers were set did I open the folder labeled Evidence, the calendar screenshot, the Ring doorbell clip where Mary's voice said, Family table is 4-4, not 5. The seating chart photo with the penciled as discussed. I compiled them into a single time-stamped packet with a neutral cover note context for risk determination enacted on the evening of Saturday, the 1st of June, 2024. I sent the packet to my counsel with the subject line for records, then blind copied my office archive. I did not send it to Joey. I did not send it to Mary. Not yet. You do not show your cards to people who have already instructed the dealer to stack the deck. I will tell that part later. My phone buzzed. Patty, first dance in 15, all cues are clean. A second buzz, Callie, because friendship has a sixth sense. I let it go to voicemail and texted back 3 words written in full switch, is ready. She replied with one sentence that made my spine feel less like a column and more like a bridge you built this to hold. I smiled at the screen because she was right. People call what I do logistics. What I do is build structures that do not collapse when someone kicks at them on purpose. I stepped into the hall and found the general manager coming toward me reading his tablet. He looked up with the expression of a man who has just been handed a fire plan and discovered it is also an evacuation map. We will follow your pause after the first dance, he said. If they offer an alternate guarantor, you vet it, I answered, and you accept only if you feel safe and fully covered. No hard feelings either way. He studied me for the small tremor people expect in a woman at the edge of herself. It was not there. He nodded, almost a bow. Understood. Back at the tent, the lights dimmed. The band leader invited the couple to the floor, and Sarah stepped into the circle of a song she will always hear differently after tonight. She looked radiant and young and certain in the way only people with borrowed certainty can look. Joey took her hand, and they moved in the slow pattern that reads as romance on camera. I stood at the outer ring just beyond the hydrangeas and let my heart do its quiet math. 120 guests. 2 parents who had curated a lineage and forgotten to curate kindness. 1 husband with a secret measured in 4 months, and an itinerary of Arizona. All of it spinning under a ceiling of clear plastic that showed a sky indifferent to human arrangements. When the song ended, applause rose like a tide and softened. I tapped my watch once the prearranged signal to Patty, and she crossed to the band with a smile that would read to anyone else as a request for a dedication. The music slid into an instrumental vamp, and then, like a held breath, paused. The maitre d' stepped to the bar and gave a tiny shake of his head that told the bartenders to hold pours. No announcements, no drama. Just the elegant silence of a machine waiting for new instructions. Mary's head turned first the way animals sense a pressure change before a storm. Joey's phone lit in his pocket with the same emails everyone backstage had received. Somewhere across the lawn, a printer in the venue office began to hum because paper has its own way of entering a room. I felt the humiliation from the family table drain out of me like tide water leaving a rock pool, revealing the shape of what had been there all along the ridge, the reef, the structure. If they wanted a spectacle, they would be disappointed. If they wanted compliance, they were late. I took a breath that went all the way down, and for the first time that day, I felt something like mercy for the staff, who would not be screamed at, for the guests who would be spared a messy scene for myself, who had finally chosen the lever over the spotlight. The hold was in place. The story had entered the record. The rest would come in the shape of missed calls and scramble and suddenly heavy titles. But that is for the next part. For now, the music waited, the sky kept its perfect blue, and every contract I had ever honored stood quietly at my back. I asked Patty to walk with me because witnesses matter when history tries on a costume. We crossed the service hall where the air smelled of lemon and steam, then slipped through a side door toward the bridal suite. The carpet hushed our steps. Beyond the windows, the bay held its calm like a secret it refused to trade. When we entered, Sarah stood by the mirror, touching the pearl pins in her hair, as if symmetry could bless a life. Joey was there, jacket unbuttoned, phone face down. Mary sat like a verdict on the settee, one ankle crossed over the other, hands folded, the way women fold hands when they believe folding is the same as control. "I will be quick," I said, setting my binder on a low table. "This is not a scene. This is a record." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. I opened the binder to the page that matters when charm fails, signature blocks and guarantor lines. Every contract in play is under my name or my company's name. I said each word clipped clean. The authorization to release funds and services rests with me. It is now paused. Mary did not blink. Joey laughed a soft laugh that wanted to be a rescue and landed as a dodge. "Linz? What are you doing?" he asked, making my name a nickname to tug me back into smaller shape. "Ensuring safety and integrity," I answered. I slid a second sleeve from the binder and placed it beside the bouquet a printed photo of the reception seating plan with a penciled note that read, "As discussed." I did not point yet. I let paper do what paper does when it is patient. Patty stood at my shoulder, silent, steady, the kind of presence that backs truth without noise. "Family table is 4, I said, and then because euphemism is the handmaiden of cruelty, I added, 4 not 5 per your call yesterday. I tapped my phone to play the short ring camera clip. Mary's own voice filled the room with its polished edge, repeating the phrase as if delivering a menu substitution. Sarah's face emptied, then filled again with something I remembered from being young, the wish to be wrong. Joey reached for the phone. "This is out of context," he said. "This is rehearsal talk. We were trying to keep things intimate. I could have let that stand and watched it sprout into the old growth of plausible deniability. Instead, I opened my laptop and turned the screen so it faced them. Calendar entry, I said, and there it was. His screenshot captured by accident weeks earlier. Gina, 16 weeks, Thursday, mid-May. I did not say Gina out loud to hurt. I said it because truth without nouns is a rumor. Joey's shoulders fell an inch. Mary's eyes narrowed to that fine line where strategy meets anger. Sarah pressed her fingertips to the bone at the base of her throat, the way people do when breath has become a stranger. There was one more page to place on the table. I slid out a neat stack of talking points printed on heavy paper, the same house font I have seen on Mary's gala decks. The header read, "Contingency script for unexpected behavior," and the phrases danced their quiet cruelty. If she becomes emotional, redirect with gratitude. If she raises her voice, signal the band. If she questions finances, remind her she is a guest, not management. I had found the stack earlier, folded into a catering folder with a handwritten note share with groomsmen. I had not wanted to believe it. Now it sat between us like a mirror. Sarah whispered, "Is this real to the heir? Not to me? Not to her mother? Not to the man she had thought was a shield?" Mary drew a breath intended to retake the room. "This is a wedding day," she said, voice smooth, posture impeccable. "We do not litigate in silk. We do not erase in silk either," I said gentle, because cruelty does not become me even when it is due. I turned to Sarah. "You deserve a first dance that will not be ruined by a fight." Patty has held the floor for a brief pause after the first dance. During that pause, vendors and venue will require a fresh guarantor if the night is to continue. I will step back if that appears. If it does not appear, the pause holds and operations close quietly. No one will be shamed over a microphone, not even me. Joey tried one more line. "We can talk after. Do not do this to Sarah." I looked at him and felt the old ledger of grace close in my chest. "I am doing this for me," I said, "and I am doing it in a way that leaves you room to be decent." The truth of that sentence steadied me more than any script. I gathered the pages, slid them back into the binder, and nodded to Patty. We left the room as quietly as we had come. In the hall, the carpet held our footsteps. Beyond the glass, the sky stayed defiantly blue, as if to remind me that weather will not stage your feelings for you. The door clicked shut behind us. In that small sound, I heard a chapter end, another begin, and a life rearranging itself into a shape I could recognize as mine. The first dance's applause dissolved into that warm murmur parties create when they have not yet learned their story has changed. At the service station, the bartenders waited with bottles angled and towels, neat hands resting, eyes searching for a cue. The bandleader glanced toward Patty, who gave the smallest nod, and the music settled into a soft holding pattern that sounded to most ears like jazz. The maitre d' approached the bar, made a subtle motion, and the pours slowed to a dignified stop. Guests turned toward one another, confused, not yet just curious. Quiet changes are the kind that register late. I moved through the perimeter where staff traffic hums past the cake on its pedestal, past the stack of toasting flutes that would not be used for a while. In the venue office, the printer finished spitting out the memos I had sent. Pause notice for vendors' operations. Note for management. A one-page summary that used words without accusation to explain that services and payments were suspended under the risk clause until a new guarantor stepped forward to replace my company. The general manager read the paragraphs as if measuring their weight. "We will ask for a card," he said, "and for a signed assumption of liability. And for dignity," I added. He understood I meant the staff above all. Back in the tent, the subtle shift became a weather front. People whose lives had trained them to feel the slightest absence of champagne began to sniff the air. Joey's phone lit with the first of many emails. A cousin looked at me as if I could fix the thing I had decided not to fix. Mary scanned the edges of the room the way a general looks for a hill. She found me instead. Her smile arrived first, lacquered bright. "Lindsay," she said in that tone that shrinks names down, "there seems to be some confusion at the bar." I nodded. "There is clarity at the contract," I answered. "If you would like the evening to continue, the venue will need a guarantor equal to or stronger than mine. If you prefer to end here, they will help you do so graciously. Either way, staff will not absorb the cost of someone else's reputation." For a moment, I saw the calculation cross her face like a shadow. She sent Joey toward the manager, then took Sarah's hand and guided her to a small cluster of ants who could keep a young woman upright. I was grateful for that, if not for much else. In the office, Joey offered a platinum-colored card with the confidence of a man who believes the world has never met a limit. The manager took it, ran a pre-authorization, and watched the screen deliver a polite refusal that might as well have been a trumpet. The family fund's account rep called back, only to ask a question the manager would not answer who sanctioned the pause. The person who signed the work, the manager replied and hung up with his professionalism intact. I did not narrate any of this to the room. I did not raise my chin or my voice. I stood with Patty behind the floral hedge and listened to the sound a party makes when it realizes it has been placed on hold. It is not silence. It is a hum edged with disbelief, a feathered rustle of dresses, the light rattle of bracelets. Then the calls began. Phones blinked. Someone said my name and swallowed it as if it were too sharp to finish. The bandleader stepped to the microphone and in the warmest tone a man has ever used to deliver a stall said, "Friends, we are taking a brief interlude while our hosts arrange a small matter. Enjoy the night air. We will be right back." He glanced toward me and I nodded, gratitude passing between strangers who will never speak again. I wrote one message to the vendor group thread to follow the email short, human, precise. "You are protected. Do not engage in arguments. Refer questions to the manager. Take a breath and drink water. This will settle one way or another very soon." I added one personal line to the head server, "No one goes home with a target on their back." She replied with a heart typed out in letters because symbols felt wrong on a night like this. The staff began to stand a fraction taller. That mattered to me more than winning. Mary reappeared with a lawyer on speaker, the kind of voice that assumes litigation is a spell. The manager repeated the facts. The lawyer invoked phrases about tortious interference as if they were magic words. I waited until he stopped, and then, without heat, said, "The planner is a contracting party with a negotiated risk clause. Services are paused, not sabotaged. A replacement guarantor ends the pause. If you have one present it with identification, there are sentences you practice only in your mind until life pulls them into your mouth." They stood up fine. Minutes lengthened into something like a lesson. The family could not produce a guarantor on the spot with the required history. Wealth, it turned out, had structure, but not liquidity that night, not in the way that matters when a contract closes its hand. A few guests drifted toward the lawn for air. A few whispered and decided this story would make a memory. Sarah's shoulders began to slope with the weight of a truth she had not asked for. I looked at Patty. "We are done here," I said softly. "Close with care." She squeezed my hand back. I walked the service path toward the parking loop, the binder light against my side, the night finally honest around me. I did not look back for a tableau or a lesson. The lesson was already written in black and white. If you sign the paper, keep the power. If you keep the power, you can leave quietly and with your head up. The aftermath arrived first as vibration. In the car, my phone lit with missed calls. Joey, then Mary, then numbers I recognized as cousins, and numbers I did not recognize at all. Texts stacked on the screen like cards. Where are you? Come back. What are you doing? Answer me now. I turned the phone face down and let the night road carry me to a small hotel 10 minutes away, a neutral shore. I checked in under my own name because I am not hiding from myself. In the room, I set the binder on the desk, washed my hands as if removing dust from an archive, and took 3 slow breaths. Then I turned the phone over and began. To vendors, a brief thank you for professionalism, confirmation that the pause had been enacted, assurance that invoices for work performed would be honored per notice terms. To the venue manager, gratitude confirmation of our last exchange, a written release in case a suitable guarantor appeared by morning. To my bank, a short note in words, not numbers, summarizing the evening and reasserting the hold. To my counsel, the same with attachments. I did not write to Mary. I did not write to Joey. There was nothing to say that would not be a repeat, and repetition is the enemy of a clean record. By morning, the story had grown legs. A local business newsletter reached out with a polite inquiry about a family fund under scrutiny language that tiptoed but did not dance. I replied with one sentence I had prepared for precisely this kind of day. I comply fully with any lawful inquiry by the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and I do not comment beyond that. Names matter even when you do not spell them with heat. I signed my name, sent the line, and closed the laptop with care. Joey's first coherent message did not mention the calendar or the ring clip or the seating plan. It said, in the universal tongue of men who are out of rope, "This is not what you think. Then we can fix it. Come talk to me." Then, when I did not answer, a pivot to pity you, embarrassed Sarah. The impulse to defend myself rose and passed. I owed an apology to Sarah for the pain, perhaps, but not for the cause. The cause had its own father and mother. I texted Patty to ask how the night ended. Quietly, she wrote, "Staff home safe. Bride with cousins. House divided by silence." She added, because she is kind, "You did this clean." Around late morning, Mary called. I let it ring into voicemail and listened with my eyes closed. Her voice had found its old warmth again, the warmth that used to make me put down my facts. "Lindsay," she said, "there has been a misunderstanding. You escalated needlessly. Family is messy. These things happen. We will sort the money and you will return. If you do not, the consequences will be unpleasant for you." It was the kind of ribboned threat that arrives with a bow. I saved the message, labeled it, and smiled without humor. Then I typed a response I edited 3 times to remove generosity I did not feel. "Mary," I wrote, "I am unavailable for calls. All further communication should be directed to counsel and to the venue regarding outstanding logistics. I will not be returning to manage your event. I wish Sarah a future full of people who tell her the truth." The next calls came from institutions, not people, which is how you know a private humiliation has grown public muscle. A bank liaison asked routine questions about authorizations and wire holds. A staffer from a regulatory office asked if a packet could be transmitted securely, and my counsel handled the details. I did not savor any of it. Satisfaction has an aftertaste I do not like. What I felt instead was relief. Measured in practical units, no one screamed at a server. No one drove home drunk with a rage that could have been avoided. No one would be able to pretend there had not been warning. By afternoon, I drove back to Boston. The highway unwound under a sky that had finally decided to show clouds. I called Callie on speaker and told her the bare bones. She listened without interjecting, then said, "Come over. I will make tea. We will sit quietly and let the adrenaline bleed out." That image of bleeding without wound made me laugh for the first time in a day. At her apartment, we did exactly that, mugs warm in our hands, a silence that was not empty but full of understanding. When I finally spoke, I said I kept thinking I needed to choose between becoming the loud woman or the erased woman. Callie shook her head. "You chose to become the documented woman," she said. "That is a third option they did not plan for. In the days that followed, cancellations landed like gentle knocks. A charity board circulated a note about reviewing governance. A vendor quietly declined future projects with the family. The venue posted a neutral message thanking guests for their patience during an unexpected pause. The Connecticut gossip machine hummed in polite tones. None of it was fireworks. All of it was weather, the slow kind that reshapes a coastline while people pretend the beach is the same. I did not check Joey's social pages. I did not check Gina's. If there was an apology coming, it would try to take the shape of a secret, and I do not feed secrets anymore. Paper begets paper. Within a week, my counsel transmitted the packet to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, accompanied by a letter that chose plain language over thunder. We clarified that my company had fronted deposits, that authorization to release funds had been abused, and that an undisclosed relationship appeared to have influenced transfers and approvals. We included the photographs, the calendar entry, the ring clip, and the contingency script, whose polite sentences still made my hands cold when I thought about them. We did not venture into punishments or predictions. That is not a planner's job. My job even here was to label correctly and submit on time. There is a rhythm to being under review that I recognized from weather delays: hurry, then wait, provide, then pause. I gave sworn statements where asked, corrected my own typos before anyone else could, and answered with, I do not recall when I truly did not. The habit of precision that makes for a good event manager makes for a credible witness. Callie, who knows how to offer help without making a person feel smaller, sat with me during the first interview and took notes, not because I needed them, but because solidarity is sometimes a pen moving on a page. Mary tried a new strategy, the one that uses a softer fabric to dress the same threat. An expensive envelope arrived with a letter that said the word amicable twice and the word misunderstanding 3 times. It suggested that returning to business as usual would be in everyone's best interest, and that failing that, I might find my client base thinner than I remembered. I wrote a response that my counsel approved, using phrases that sound almost dull until you need them: cease and desist bad faith retaliation. I did not explain my feelings. I explained the law. There were nights when sleep wove in badly, the body remembering humiliation in flashes, even when the mind had shelved it neatly. On those nights, I walked the harbor before dawn and let the city remind me that tides belong to no one. I thought about Sarah too, the young woman with pearl pins and sudden knowledge. Quiet revenge does not require that she suffer. It requires that I stop suffering in her name. I sent one short message through a cousin who could be trusted: I am sorry for your pain. When you are ready for details, you can trust I will provide them privately and gently. There was no reply, which was fine. The offering itself was a kind of peace. Work blessedly continued. Word travels in my industry in currents, and some of those currents carried the story that I had held a line without making a spectacle. A museum gala reached out. A vineyard wedding asked if my risk clause came standard. I said yes. The calendar filled in the way a field fills after a controlled burn with green that looks fragile and is not. Months turned, and with them the edge in my chest dulled to something like a healed seam. Then an email from an Italian villa I had long admired. Would I consider a limited engagement to oversee a summer celebration in Tuscany? The note was full of vowels and light. I read it twice, waited a day, then said yes. It was not an escape. It was an affirmation that the part of me that builds beauty with systems had not been broken by a family who mistook control for love. I booked a flight for late summer and told Callie I was afraid to feel excited in case excitement jinxed it. You are allowed joy without permission, she said. I wrote the sentence on a sticky note and taped it above my desk. Before I left, a small notice appeared in a Connecticut business journal. A certain family fund was undergoing routine review. Leadership had declined to comment. It was the kind of bland line that conceals hurricanes. I did not print it. I did not dance. I simply closed the tab and went back to my packing list for a country whose light feels medicinal. If there were consequences coming for the people who tried to erase me with manners, they would arrive in envelopes and emails months from now. My life did not need to wait around to greet them. Florence looked like a painting that had discovered it could move. In the early mornings, I crossed a bridge while the city set its tables, swallowed coffee that tasted like the sun had decided to be liquid, and rehearsed my Italian pleases until they felt less like performance and more like courtesy. The villa in Tuscany was everything brochures promise, and none of what they can capture rows of olive trees bearing their quiet fruit stone, warmed into kindness by centuries of light, a horizon that held its breath. I unpacked my clipboard and my calm, and remembered that systems can make joy feel inevitable. The couple I worked with were kind in the way people are kind when they know kindness is not a currency, but a language. They asked good questions. They respected answers. We built a weekend that felt like generosity rather than proof. When the first night's lanterns blinked awake and the band sent strings across a courtyard that had once watched monarchs argue, I felt the muscle in my shoulders finally unspool. Work can be therapy when you let it be honest. On the second morning, I stood with Callie on a small terrace, both of us holding peaches that tasted like sweetness had a temperature. She had flown over on her own dime to be my anchor, because that is what anchors do. "You look taller," she said. "Grief trims us down. Truth gives it back." We laughed, and I told her a story about a caterer who had rearranged an entire seating plan to accommodate a grandmother who spoke only dialect. This, I said, is what power is supposed to do: make room. My phone buzzed with a stateside number I did not recognize. I let it pass, then checked the transcript out of an old habit I had learned to trust. It was a reporter asking for comment on findings I would not discuss. I turned the phone face down and looked at the hills. "The view is better than the news," I said. We clinked our peaches together like glasses. That evening, under a sky the color of apricots, I wrote 2 letters I had been composing in my head for months. The first was to myself at the start of all this. You were not crazy. You were curated out of a picture because curated pictures make powerful people feel safe. Hold your ground, keep your receipts, choose stillness over spectacle. The second was to Sarah. Even if I never sent it, you deserved people who told you the truth sooner. When you are ready, I will sit with you and answer without anger. In both letters, I wrote the sentence that had become my private prayer: I want my independence. I want the truth to matter. On the final day of the event, after the couple had left in a vintage car, and the staff had put away the last glass without a chip, I walked alone down a row of cypress trees. The air smelled like herbs and sunlight. I thought of the girl in Greenwich with pearl pins, and the boy who chose Arizona, and the woman who believed power lived only in blood. I forgave none of them, and all of them at once, which is to say, I allowed their choices to belong to them, and no longer to me. Standing there, I realized that my revenge had never been the pause or the paperwork. It was the life I kept building beyond them, the table I set for myself, with a chair that did not need anyone else's permission slip. When I boarded the plane home, I carried no souvenirs except a small notebook filled with timelines and smells, and the name of a vineyard dog who had adopted me for 72 hours. Back in Boston, my office key fit perfectly. The whiteboard lines were exactly where I had left them, and the harbor reminded me that return is its own kind of miracle. I turned on the lamp, opened a new file called Autumn Clients, and wrote one line at the top: we do not create beauty to prove we belong. We create beauty because we already do. If you have listened this far, you already know the shape of the lesson, but I will say it plain because plain language saves women like me time. When someone tries to erase you with etiquette, answer them with evidence. When someone calls their cruelty tradition, call it what it is and write it down. Quiet revenge is not cold. It is careful. It is the choice to let paper and policy do what your voice should not have to shout to accomplish. It is walking away before the scene can be written for you, and toward a life that does not require permission slips signed in gold ink. I think about that night in Greenwich sometimes, about the way the clear-top tent held a sky so blue it looked emotional. I think about the sound the room made when it realized the machine had paused, and how that sound was not anger but confusion, and how confusion is where people reveal themselves. Joey revealed a man who believed context could erase content. Mary revealed a woman who thought blood was a contract no one else could sign. Sarah revealed a human being trying to stand in a gown that had suddenly become heavier than silk. and I revealed to myself a spine I had built over years of saving other people's days. If you are sitting in your car or folding laundry or walking a dog and wondering whether your boundaried choice will make you the villain in someone else's retelling, this is the part I want you to hold. You are allowed to be the protagonist in your own story without apology. Document everything. Speak softly. Let the system carry the weight it was designed to carry. Do not set yourself on fire to keep the chandelier lit. If you need a sentence to borrow when your mouth forgets how to make one, take mine. Every contract here is under my name or my company. I am invoking the clause. It reads cooler than it feels. That is all right. Coolness is not the absence of heart. It is the presence of discipline. Now the hook circles back to where we started. Saturday, the 1st of June, 2024. My mother-in-law smirked and said, "Family is blood, not paperwork." By hour 3, I had lost a seat at a table and nearly lost deposits measured in tens of thousands of dollars that my company had advanced. I am Lindsay, and they thought their plan had worked. They did not plan for paper. If family greed has ever blindsided you, tell me your city in the comments so we can chart a map of places where truth chose itself. Subscribe, because the quiet parts people whisper behind doors become the loudest lessons when you put them on the record, and the next story I will tell begins with a doorbell camera and ends with a board meeting that did not go the way a homeowners association expected. I keep one last image for myself as an ending and a beginning. After I sent the last packet and packed for Italy, I stood in my small office and turned off the light. The room went to shadow, but the whiteboard lines glowed faintly in what was left of day. I thought about all the timelines I had drawn, all the names I had written, and erased all the clauses I had built to shelter strangers. Then I wrote 2 words in ink so black it looked like a promise: choose truth. That is the whole technique. That is the whole revenge. And if you forget, come back to this channel, and I will remind you with another story where the weather is beautiful and the people are not, and where evidence loves you better than applause ever did.